Hi, everyone. My name is David Rhew. I'm the Global Chief Medical Officer for Microsoft. Welcome to today's session. I'll be moderating it. It's an hour-long session, but it really is not just me, but it's all of you as well. So with that said, I'm going to ask a favor. If you wouldn't mind turning on your cameras, I'd like to be able to have a conversation with you. I'll share details on things that I've been working on. But I'd also like to learn a little bit more about you all and try to find ways that this conversation can be as productive as possible. So with that said, I'd also like to perhaps go through a round of introductions as well. So as you go through it, maybe you could just say a little your name, where you're from, and a little bit about kind of what gets you interested and excited about this topic of healthy longevity. So I've got a list of folks that are on the participant list. And so perhaps maybe I can just run right through that. And I think it's in alphabetical order, so I may just go directly through that. But I see in terms of folks that are not part of the NAM or production crew, Jacqueline Lamb, are you on? Might be kind of early morning for you all, so if not, if you're not quite there yet, maybe we'll jump to the next person.
Yes, I'm on, but I cannot show my face right now, so probably I can introduce myself. You want me to introduce myself briefly, right?
Yes, just if you could just say a little bit about, like, well, first of all, where are you at? And tell me a little bit more about yourself. But let's keep it brief. We'll less than 30 seconds.
Okay. So I'm Jacqueline Lam. I'm from the University of Hong Kong, and with my collaborator, Professor Victor Lee, also from the same university, we have been awarded a project in 2021. And the upcoming one as well, to study to use drug repurposing techniques, AI-driven drug repurposing techniques, to find out solutions for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease, for the late onset Alzheimer's disease. So that's what we are doing.
Fantastic, thank you, and great work that you're all doing. So I'm going to just go down the list, and I see Lawrence Chung.
Hi. Did
I get that right? Okay.
Hi, I'm Lawrence Chung from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. So I am actually a collaborator with Jacqueline Lam and Victor Lee on a different project, not the project awarded by NAM. So I'm a linguist, and in the other project, we want to look at how we can use AI to look at the language production by Alzheimer's disease patients. Yeah.
Fantastic. Love it. All right. Tell me if I get this right. Lang Meng Ouyang?
Hi.
How do you pronounce your name?
It's Liang Meng Ouyang.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Okay, so I'm the project manager from Academia Sinica, Taiwan. So I'm personally interested in healthcare. So that's why I found out it's very exciting to be in this project. So help with the Awardees awardees and all the external and internal communications.
Got it. Are you able to turn on your camera for a bit and just say hi or okay, there you go. Hey, hi.
Hi.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I'm sure probably many of you are surprised that we're going to be turning on cameras and talking a lot more. So
yeah.
it'll make it more interactive. It'll be fun. So
okay,
excellent.
That's great.
Very good. Well, thank you for joining, and excited to have this conversation with you.
Okay, thank you for having me.
All right. Well, we're going to go down this list. Looks like Justin, you just joined. Justin Jaworski.
Oh yeah. Hello.
Hey, yeah. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm a assistant professor at University of Texas at Arlington, the bioengineering department, and I'm a 2021 Catalyst awardee, and I am working on a project based on utilizing bacteriophage for modifying the gut microbiome in order to try to take advantage of some of the nice components that can be converted through our natural diet into compounds that can help improve cardiovascular health.
Fantastic. Love it. So where you said University of Texas or where is that
UT
right?
Arlington. Yep.
Awesome. Correct. Okay. So let's keep on moving down. Michael Liu.
Hi, how do you do? I'm Michael Liu. I'm a radiologist at Mass General Hospital and Harvard Med School. We were a 2020 Catalyst awardee and now a 2022 awardee as well. And this particular award is using sort of all the chest X-rays and other images that we normally get through routine clinical care. And the idea is to use AI to look at these images and what happens to these people, 6, 12 years later, and try to make predictions about who's going to develop lung cancer, who's going to have a heart attack, who will have a bad outcome. And then to do selected interventions like doing lung cancer screening CT to try to catch more of these lung cancers before they get to the point where they're more difficult to treat. So that's what this particular proposal is about.
Oh, fantastic. Do you work at all with Keith Dreyer?
I work in his department. I don't have a lot of interaction with him, but he's in the department. So he's the head of the data science organization here.
Okay. Yep. Sounds great. Yeah. I'll be seeing him later on this week. So, okay. Fantastic. Well, let's move on. Mohsen Shafizadeh.
Yeah, hello, thank you. Yes, my name is Mohsen Shafizadeh. I'm assistant professor at Sheffield Hallam University in England. And my area of expertise is human movement science. And I am a Catalyst awardee 2022, working on the digital resistance training for a stroke patient to use at home.
Fantastic. Well, welcome. We've got quite a global group here, so I think we'll probably have a great opportunity to learn from each other as well. Thank you, Mohsen. Let's move on. Ryan Yang. How do you pronounce your last name?
Thank you. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Hey, Ryan.
So I'm also from the University of Hong Kong. I work as an assistant professor at the School of Public Health. So I was the 2021 Health and Longevity Awardee, working on exploring whether metformin can be repurposed for health and longevity using genetics.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. No last name here, just Sylvester.
Hi, yeah, sorry, my setup doesn't really allow for a camera. I'm Sylvester Wong from the National University of Singapore. So I'm actually a graduate student representing my team who are 2020 awardees of the HLCA. Yeah, so we work on identifying some biomolecules that we can use to distinguish some microglia that are aging in the aging brain that we can use to distinguish to identify therapeutics that we can use to target them, to differentiate them from normal, healthy functioning microglia. Yeah, so that's our work.
Fantastic. All right, let's move on. Victor Oakley. Victor, are you on? Or perhaps maybe you're on mute. All right, well, maybe while Victor's getting set up,
Victor,
let's move on.
Victor, you did not unmute. You need to unmute yourself.
Okay, sorry about that.
Oh, there you go.
Yes, I'm Victor Lee from the University of Hong Kong. I'm a chair professor of information engineering. So my research is in artificial intelligence, technology, and applications. So as Jacqueline has pointed out, we work together, and we've also some medical professors, and we are a 2021 Catalyst awardee. And we just heard that we will also be getting an award later today. And both projects are related to Alzheimer's disease. In the 2021 award, we basically developed an AI-driven approach for drug repurposing to treat Alzheimer's disease.
Terrific. Excellent. So important. Thank you. Let's move on. Wenting Zhao.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Wenting Zhao from Singapore, Nanyang Technological University, and I'm an assistant professor in biomedical engineering. And I work with another two colleagues of mine, working on the new project just got awarded this year for the Catalyst Award. And the topic we're working on is a new type of nanochip to probe the nuclear membrane remodeling during skin cell aging. Yes, thanks.
Fantastic. Okay. Have I missed anyone that is a participant that would like to introduce themselves? It's possible you may have jumped in throughout. And if not, then let me just provide a little bit of logistics. As some of you are probably well aware, on Zoom, there's an ability to provide, you raise your hand, so to speak. So if you click on the reactions button, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th, or no, 6th button on the lower panel right above the camera area. Then there's a hand raise button, and you can just raise your hand. And then I'll just show you an example. So like here, I'm raising my hand, and then you can lower your hand as well. And so what we'd like to do is, as we have these conversations, this is really more of just an opportunity for us to talk to each other. There's less presentation, more discussion. But there's certainly things that may come to mind in terms of questions and things that you like. The way that I've been asked to organize it is to share a little bit about myself, a little bit some of the work that I've been doing throughout my career, specifically as it pertains to healthy longevity, and then really open it up to all of us for a discussion. There might be specific things that resonate from my story. There may be specific initiatives or projects that you think are things that you'd like to talk about, but it really is designed for us to just have an open collaboration and discussion. We have, until 10:55 Eastern time, so it's maybe a little less than 15 minutes or so for us to have this discussion. But let me just first share, and first of all, thank you for joining. This is an exciting, talented, accomplished group. I think that we're going to have a lot to share. My journey is a bit unusual because I didn't really anticipate when I was early in my career that I would actually even be doing what I'm doing today. I think deep down, I knew that I wanted to work on something that was going to make a difference in the world in a positive way, and also something that I felt like I could uniquely contribute to. And when I was an undergraduate in college, and I went to college at the University of Michigan in the United States, I was a computer science major, largely because computers were just starting to become popular. This is now let's rewind the clock back into the 1980s. So if I'm not even sure if everyone was born back then, but back then video games were not on a handheld, but they were on these arcade type of machines. And I just thought it was really incredible that you could actually have computers make video games that were interesting. And then at the same time, there was a sort of an emergence of the personal computer, where people are starting to use the PC as a means to do programming. And BASIC was sort of the program that most of us were learning at the time. But eventually, it became something a lot more sophisticated, Pascal and machine language, which we've now completely surpassed. But at the time when I was a computer science major, I did a lot of work in a language called Lisp, and it was essentially one of the early languages for artificial intelligence. And it allowed me to think creatively about how AI could be applied in a variety of different areas. I had also had a desire to become a physician, and because of that, I ended up having a dual sort of a path. One was around becoming, sort of preparing myself to be a medical professional. The other one was, for me, more just fun, just kind of programming. And so my thesis ended up being how artificial intelligence could be used in healthcare. And keep in mind, in the 1980s, there was very little to base it on. So I based it on more of what I saw on TV through science fiction and just my own imagination. So my advisor, a gentleman named John Laird, he thought it was great. He thought it was a highly innovative, but he also thought it was a lot of science fiction. So it wasn't really something that one could even envision at the time that could become reality. Well, went through medical school. I'd say traditional, as with most medical students, you don't really have a chance to do a whole lot apart from just studying and then, kind of working in the area of, clinical practice in your latter 2 years. And then became an intern resident out in the West Coast at UCLA, Cedars-Sinai. These are some of the hospitals in California. And as part of that, focused on, just general internal medicine, had a particular interest in a curiosity in terms of why care was actually quite different between different hospitals that we would rotate through. So I worked at the VA, the county, academic medical centers, community-based hospitals. And I always wondered whether or not the information that we were gathering could potentially be used to help better inform clinicians. And, so I started doing some studies. And first of all, I identified that there were a lot of gaps, which I think we all started to recognize was universal. And it was even within the own hospital, different physicians practicing in different ways. And a lot of that was unwarranted because the reality is patients were not necessarily receiving the best care with all that variation. And so I started focusing on how do we reduce that variation by presenting the right information at the right time. And this started then the path of introducing something at the time called evidence-based medicine, which today is sort of standard, but back then was actually quite controversial. There were doctors that thought this was called cookbook medicine. They were very, offended or perhaps, maybe threatened by the fact that there could be some other external forces that would tell them how to practice. But what we started realizing was that this could be used in a very helpful way. It's a very similar story to kind of what we're dealing with AI today. Like a lot of this is information that's been processed through a very rigorous scientific manner and presented back to clinicians and other individuals. And in many cases, unless we've kind of gone through that process of rigor, it will get accepted or rejected. But one of the key things that we recognized was that if the information was presented in a clinically workflow compatible manner, then it was more likely to get adopted than if it was presented in a way that they had to access it on like another website or through a login. And so that got us to thinking about, well, what's the best way to make it clinically workflow compatible? A large number of physicians were starting to move towards the electronic health record, and we started figuring out ways that we can embed this information in the form of what's now known as clinical decision support. But back then, there really wasn't a whole concept of how this could be done apart from alerts. And so we started realizing that there were other ways to inform doctors and nurses and other clinicians and that were much more workflow compatible, things like order sets. And an order set, for those that may not have familiarity, is just a set of standardized orders that allow you to be able to provide recommendations and allow you to be able to essentially order efficiently. And we thought it was going to be used because of the fact that it was improving quality and reducing safety events. But in the reality, it was used because it saved the doctor 95% of the time required to enter orders into the EHR. And so this was, I think, a real big revelation, and ultimately one that, again, applies to AI. If you're solving problems that improve workflow efficiency, or it's embedded into something that's already workflow efficient and you're not stopping the workflow, it's more likely to get adopted. And so what ended up happening is, because of a variety of factors, one, that this was something that was workflow compatible, but I'd say the more significant one was the fact that every hospital across the country, because of a national mandate to implement EHRs, was now starting to figure out that they needed to have EHR go lives. And the barrier for all of this was the physician. The physicians were most resistant to doing this. But with the order sets, we actually were able to remove that barrier. And next thing we knew, everyone was using evidence-based order sets as part of their go live. And this idea, which became a product, which became a company, was acquired by Cerner, which is a large health technology company, kind of catapulted me into this whole area of healthcare technology. And so from there, I was no longer just a researcher, but I was actually someone developing products for, individuals and organizations so that they could use it, so they could deliver better care. Well, a big part of my area of focus continued to be on quality of care, and I ended up, I was invited to serve on this committee called the National Quality Forum, which is sometimes abbreviated NQF. And NQF, their responsibility was looking at quality indicators, but they were evaluating in a very scientific, rigorous way to determine if this is something that could be used as a national or an international quality standard. And so they would put these endorsements on these quality measures. And so that was something that I had been doing for many years. And so for me, this was quite interesting that we would do this. Now, this actually was an activity that I don't think anyone really cared about, apart from us folks that were interested in quality and safety, until it became part of what's now known as pay for performance. And so doctors, hospitals were essentially graded on their performance relative to these measures, and then they would get more pay if they performed higher, and they would actually get less reimbursement if they performed lower. So next thing we knew, that quality of care indicators became a central part of how care was being delivered. And then that was moving towards electronic capture of data. And then ultimately, so next thing we knew, we were front and center nationally on so many different issues related to quality and safety. Now, one of those topics that we had to debate and ultimately we endorsed was something called 30-day readmissions and 30-day mortality. Now, 30-day readmissions and 30-day mortality is something that hospitals and doctors had basically said, it's not my responsibility. When a person leaves my clinic, or I should say my hospital, and they've been hospitalized, how can I control what happens? Essentially, it's up to the person to do the right thing. And if you're going to judge my performance as a hospital or as a physician based on the fact that this person died within 30 days, and literally the way we had set it up was that a person could get hit by a bus, and then that would be marked as, sort of non-compliance or like a negative, because we didn't really have a whole different way to differentiate. But the reality is that never happened. We looked through the data. No one was ever hit by a bus. And so the numbers spoke for themselves that we could control it through a variety of mechanisms. So next thing we knew, hospitals were focusing on not just the acute care, but they were talking about longitudinal care outside, at least for 30 days. And I remember those debates that we used to have about like whether or not this is even something that healthcare providers could manage, because we're so used to the in-person clinic visit or the hospitalization. But it stuck with me, even though we endorsed it and we saw, I'd say, a change in patterns. I always felt that there weren't enough tools for patients and consumers to be able to, take better care of themselves. And so around this time, everyone was starting to get really excited over the smartphone. Everyone was using the smartphone, and we were getting text reminders, and the apps were being developed. And I thought, why can't the smartphone be, our vehicle, just like the EHR is our vehicle for workflow compatibility for clinicians? Why can't the smartphone be the lifestyle compatibility vehicle to inform patients? And so right around this time, there was a big push for consumer technology companies, and I'm going to cite, a few in particular. Certainly, Apple, Google, Microsoft, and Samsung. Given the fact that Samsung, when you think about smartphones, it was really Apple and Samsung with Google as an operating system, as for Android, that they were kind of the big players. And so what we found was that these tech organizations were starting to think more, creatively about like how can their technologies be used in this healthcare technology, this complicated space. But one of the areas was around consumer engagement, and I was asked by Samsung to be their global chief medical officer. So I was again working in the EHR space for well over a decade, doing a lot of things, working at the quality improvement, and at this time. Working in the Samsung arena, it was very different because it was now working for a large consumer technology company that is, basically building products that are consumer oriented. And we were trying to think about how could this be related to healthcare. well, everyone was thinking about, well, we're going to track steps and people will use the steps and essentially that will be the way for people to get better health. But very quickly we realized that the people who track their steps, it's a very small subset of those folks, and they're essentially highly motivated. And once you capture your steps on a daily basis, it really isn't that much motivation beyond that. So we started realizing it's more to it than just capturing the data. It's about how it's presented. It's about the motivational factors. So I started working a lot in this space, and I think the things that I started learning were, it's not about the technology. It's about all these other factors that surround the technology. It's about the motivational factors. It's about the barriers. It's about how we can put programs together to enable people to become, healthier. And this really got me more into the space of thinking longevity and healthy living. And as the more I started exploring it, the more I realized that it wasn't exactly what I had originally envisioned. I thought it was more about genes and diet and diseases, but it was real in exercise. But things like social connections, that being a big part of healthy living. So where you live and how that impacts it. It's about being able to have motivation and purpose in your life. There's so many other factors that I kind of opened my eyes the more I started looking into this. And then I started realizing that every one of these, whether it would be about your diet, your exercise, managing your conditions, your social connections, your motivations, technology was a huge enabler for a big part of this. And so we started realizing that we could create social networks and programs that could be run through mobile devices, and we could use sensors to be able to capture data and improve one's health and coordinate care with doctors. We could do telehealth through the mobile phone and through tablets. And so, this kind of opened up a brand new category for me in terms of understanding how we can use technology to take better care of people. One of the things that I would say for me really struck me as quite important was the fact that we were capturing a lot of data, specifically on the mobile devices and the wearables. And I wanted to, like many of you, pull that data together in ways that I could apply artificial intelligence, because this is kind of, my original story started off with AI in healthcare, but you can't do AI without data, and you can't do data with AI without meaningful data. It had to be novel sources in different places that we were capturing, and so we were capturing it from these mobile devices and wearables. But I couldn't combine that with the known electronic health record data. So if they were diabetics, I wanted to know what medicines they were on and things like that. So this is when I started moving down this journey. And every time I started looking into it, I kept on getting, I'll say, a roadblock being that organizations weren't willing to share their data. The data wasn't in a format that allowed me to be able to kind of bring it together. So interoperability ended up becoming this huge barrier that I started working on, not just within Samsung, but in collaboration with many working groups across the world, because it was an international effort to think about how can we create standards. And at the time, I think people were starting to realize that the electronic health records weren't fulfilling the promise, largely because of interoperability. Organizations had built their own EHRs, but none of them communicated with each other. So there was a big push now within the ONC, the Office of the National Coordinator with the United States, to redefine what's sort of the roadmap for EHRs and put interoperability front and center. So next thing we knew, FHIR, Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources, became that standard that everyone was focusing on. And as part of all the discussions that I had been around that's when I was introduced to other stakeholders that were heavily focused in this space. And Microsoft was one of them. And I joined Microsoft 3 years ago, largely because what we were trying to do was to democratize data, make it easier for consumers and patients and researchers that working on behalf of these organizations to take it full advantage of. And that's now opened up a whole set of opportunities, and many of you are taking full advantage of this. The fact that we now have data that can be brought in from different sources, imaging data, wearables data, EHR data. We have an opportunity to be able to think about how data can be combined using multimodal data sets. We're applying AI to validate a large number of these on the data sets that we have. But then we're also now starting to look at things that are, so I'll call it frontiers, next things ahead. And for me, that's where I spent a lot of my time thinking about, is the AI algorithm that we've built something that is generalizable to the population that we're addressing? So while we may have built it on the data set that we had readily available, it would be important to validate it on a much more diverse, broader data set. Have we introduced bias or even, things that could be viewed as discriminatory, elements into it? And as I think about, how we've done clinical studies in the past, sometimes we didn't have all the data points, and it looks like, maybe some examples, race is a risk factor for early mortality, when in reality, it was actually not the race, but it was the factors, the socioeconomic factors around the race and that were driving towards that. And so did we build our model appropriately using all the data elements that maybe we did based on what we had, but had we thought through the fact that this is something that is actually not really, if we were to take those factors, ethnicity, race would actually fall out. And why is that important? Because when we apply our AI, we have to think about how it's going to be used. It's going to be used by individuals that are making decisions about whether you have a specific treatment, access to a treatment or not. And if it's viewed that we have limited resources and you're someone who is unlikely to benefit from this because your mortality rate is going to be too high, and that was because of a race factor, and that was something that really shouldn't have been there, then there's a flaw in our system. So we've been starting to think about these type of issues, bias in AI, and is there an ability for us to make it generalizable? And then is it actually working as designed? And are we able to now think about, how do we update this on a regular basis? So that's the next frontier. That's kind of where I'm spending a lot of my time thinking about, it's kind of gone through this journey of devices and capturing the data, making it more interoperable, focusing on the problems at hand, large number of them around, getting it to be adopted, making sure it's making an impact, and now thinking about how is it going to be used responsibly. So I'll pause. I've done probably a lot more than what I had envisioned in terms of sharing of it about my story. I told you a little bit about what I've been doing, what motivates me. But I'd really love to hear from you all. This is really a design for an open discussion. As I mentioned before, you can go to the reactions button. There's again, an opportunity for you to raise your hand, or if you'd like to just simply jump right in, feel free to do so. So I'll pause. Thoughts, questions, comments? All right, but I see Justin. Justin, please. And you're on mute.
Thank you so much. I think it was really fantastic how you were able to combine these different areas, having this unique experience of being able to be in the hospital as well as having the computer science background is fantastic. Is there any opportunities for people who haven't had that chance to, other than shadowing a physician, to know about these types of workflows that you talked about that are critical, and how can you imagine, aside from just having the same experience that you did, that others could try to get some intuition for that area, I guess?
One of the things that really impresses me most about all the people that I've met throughout my journey, some of the smartest people in clinical medicine never saw a patient themselves. They just are around people that have, and they have worked in environments in which that has been sort of key topic. So you don't have to be a doctor, I guess is the bottom line, to be knowledgeable about how healthcare runs and the ways that we can improve upon it. And I feel like a large part of it has to do with kind of where you're situated. If you end up working, only in like one category, I'm gonna put different categories, general categories, technology. So if you only work in the technology space and you don't really, and you're trying to figure out how technology applies in these other sectors, if you haven't had exposure in terms of like working with hospitals, payers, med device, pharma, life sciences, you really don't have an idea of how this general concept can be applied. So, getting more vertically specific is important. Now, there's an element of clinical, but as I mentioned, you don't have to be a clinician to understand it, but you probably should work in an institution that does deliver care or that does something related to healthcare. And when we think of healthcare, we think of providers as sort of being the healthcare providers as being sort of one category, but there's also the payer market, which is deeply integrated and that they play a very essential role. There's the pharma life sciences, there's the med tech space, and even retail now. And so with any one of those categories, I would say healthcare is, if you spend your time within there, so you end up developing that level of expertise. I would add two more categories, which I think are becoming really important. One is public health and the other is community health. And to me, those have now been brought to the forefront with the pandemic, and the fact that we've neglected and not really kind of addressed those are also things that would be important. And then the third area, which I think is also probably under-recognized, it ties into some of the work that I did as a health services researcher, evaluating the impact that these interventions have on outcomes, access to care, quality of care, patient safety, because at the end of the day, we have to demonstrate that this is actually making a difference. And then that ties into policy, and that ties into reimbursement, and that ties into regulation. And so this whole other category of outcomes and reimbursement and policy is another category. I think I've had in my career an opportunity to spend time in all three categories, but I would recommend that no matter what you do in whatever area you focus on, that you think about those three, just to make sure that you understand that no matter what you're doing, there's going to be some kind of this dynamic balance between all three of those. Yeah, but great question. Yeah, thanks. Victor.
Yes. So I guess you have very special background in that you are yourself not only a medical doctor, but that you are also very much a technologist. And I think it's very important for those of us who were not medical doctors, but we are technologists, to get to know the so-called user requirements. So we need to have medical doctors on our team, or at the very least, we need to talk to them and find out, what their needs are. I can share some personal experience with you because early on, I was in charge of technology transfer at the University of Hong Kong. And then we have colleagues who developed this, great technology. So, well, it's great because we publish it in papers, right, in the best journals. So you go talk to an industrialist and you say, hey, I have this great technology. Why don't I transfer technology to you? Unfortunately, many times they said, well, this technology is good, but I don't think I can sell it because it's too complicated or it is too expensive. Or, can you make it less expensive? And of course, they say, it's not that, because in the academic world, we say there's no number two, right? So we're the first one to invent this. You cannot publish a paper if you're the second one to invent this idea. But in industry, it's different. Industry, they say you can be the second person to use this idea, but if you do it in a much more efficient, cost-effective way, you can still make a lot of money, right? Yeah, but anyway, I had a question for you, and that is, you were earlier mentioning the fact that, and you're exactly right, AI, we cannot do AI without data. The problem is, it turned out there are plenty of data available, but some government organizations are very strict in terms of how they let you use the data. In particular, usually they use things like privacy. And the problem is we tell them, don't worry about it. We'll anonymize the data. So we assign an ID. We don't know who this person is, blah, blah, blah. But then they are still reluctant because I suppose they are worried that someone may sue them or somehow someone managed to reverse engineer and get the identity. For example, we're looking at the relationship between air pollution and asthma disease. And we wanted to go to hospital data, and so they have record of asthma patient, and we want their address. They say, well, we cannot give you the address. The only thing we can give you is the district that they live in. But in Hong Kong, there are only 18 districts. So basically, you can have very different air pollution information within the same district. We really need to be, more fine-grained, geographically fine-grained air pollution data. So we're scratching our head and we're saying, how can we try to come up with a more fine-grained estimate of the address, because they won't give us an address. Okay.
Yep.
So what's the suggestion, in dealing with government agencies like that?
Yeah, and I would extend that not just to government agencies, but this is across the board in large institutions, small institutions, and even at the individual personal level. Concern about data privacy and what you intend to do with it is universal. So let me share with you some of the things that we have been working on, because I think this is, I'll call it the next chapter for how we manage data and AI. When we think about the current process, a lot of this is about trust and de-identification and saying, hey, we're going to de-identify it and trust us that we're going to take care of the data. Well, we need to put more safeguards behind that, because generally speaking, organizations do not want to relinquish their data. Once it goes out of their control, they don't know what's going to happen. And they don't care that you signed an agreement that you trust that you're going to do it within certain parameters. So let's now think about the paradigm of bringing the algorithms and the AI to the data, not pulling the data away from it and putting it into some central data lake. If we think about sort of this federated learning piece, there's a few different strategies that we have been finding to be very helpful. Today, encryption is largely based on data at rest, data in transit. There's another opportunity when the data is actually in use that we can protect it. We can create a secure enclave where the data moves from different sources into it. And the enclave is set up in such a way that even the organization that's managing it cannot look at the data. They cannot extract the data. They cannot copy it. They cannot look at the algorithms that are in place. It runs the algorithms and it pushes out the outputs to all the appropriate, and it cleans the data slate. That is an approach that we have heard can be extremely valuable, because then it ensures with a technology safeguard that data cannot be in any way used apart from the way it was originally designed. And there's an element also here of fine-grained consent, because you can specifically within your data set say, these are the pieces that can go directly into this. We're not going to move all our data. We're just going to consent for these specific elements. And then at the same time, we can even go one step further, where with the fine-grained consent, we can pull the specific data elements, and the data can reside completely in the actual, where it's located, and that by pulling the specific elements with even more fine-grained consent. So rather than just kind of like pulling bunches of data that are relevant to it, but actually the specific meta tag data elements, and then running it through these secure enclaves, we have an ability to even go one step further. So this is called confidential compute. It is an area that we envision will become extremely important as organizations look to collaborate, because with that next generation of AI, it's about collaboration. It's about pulling different data sets together and validating our AI on this larger data set, but doing it in ways that ensure privacy and trust. And the only way to do that is not just through traditional methods, but we need technology safeguards. So that would be my thought in terms of like where we're heading and how we would potentially address that. Victor, your thoughts? Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, great. Boy, I think Wenting, yes, you have a question.
Yes, thanks. Thanks for the fantastic sharing and all the suggestions and opinions sharing. And I'm curious for those database those applications? Do they need FDA approval if they get into the healthcare, really guide the doctors or the patients' therapeutics or treatment plans? And how it's going to be approved?
Should they or are they? Is it required? Right. I think that's all, right now ambiguous. There are actually several algorithms, AI algorithms that have gotten FDA cleared. There are many that are out there that have not. And it's not like, they're required to, because they kind of fall into a gray zone. Clinical decision support is really kind of a gray zone. But I would say it depends on how it's going to get used, whether it's going to get embedded within specific devices, whether there'll be an opportunity for a person to actually review and override it. So a lot of different factors. But I would say the FDA in particular has taken a closer look at AI and is viewing it as a software as a medical device. There are policy recommendations around it, and soon you will probably see more guidance on this. But so it is of high interest to regulatory organizations, and it's important for us to stay on top of it. We do not want to find ourselves building something and then all of a sudden, having to stop because we haven't kind of thought through the fact that certain parts, ideally should be regulated. Or one of the things that the FDA has suggested is that if you are building an algorithm, that you speak to them early. They're not there to stop you, at least. That's what they've been really promoting. They're there to help learn and then also guide. And so if, my recommendation is, if you haven't gotten it FDA cleared, think about what are the ways that, is it truly something that you believe doesn't require it? And if it does, there probably should be a discussion.
Thanks very much.
Ryan.
Thank you, David. Very interesting sharing of your experience. I think one of the issues that I had, with regards to research, is a thing that Professor Lee mentioned. We always wanted to get access to different data sources in, for example, Hong Kong, to study different exposures and outcomes. But then, confidentiality is often one of the issues that we have to overcome. Despite we mentioned that confidentiality has been sort of protected in other large databases, for example, like in UK or in other countries where actually, researchers can have access to all this healthcare data. So that itself is an issue that we need to deal with locally. But my question is about the use of the data, because my experience is that nowadays we have a lot of data, but the problem here is that how can we make use of these data to help what are the causes of disease? In the COVID-19 pandemic, I think the use of electronic health records actually help identify important risk factors, but sometimes it does give you some rather awkward relationship. For example, I think in the earlier study we showed that smoking actually protects you against COVID, which actually got a lot of attention. So how can we avoid the pitfall? With the data that we have, what would be your thoughts regarding how should we move forward apart from just building up or merging more and more databases and use more of sophisticated techniques like AI or machine learning? What else do we need to move the field forward?
So first off, there are many interesting points that you brought up there that are highly relevant. Obviously, we talked a bit more about confidentiality, trust, and things of that sort that continue to be major issues. And I don't see, we can put other safeguards in, such as access rights, in certain individuals having access to certain areas. I think the fine-grained consent is going to be a big part of this. I think the confidential compute, but the things that you mentioned about, is the AI working as designed? To me, that if we were to double click on that and really try to understand that, it's going to require that we rethink about how AI is developed. A lot of times we say, okay, we took the data sets, we validated against this data set, it works, we got the results, we're going to deploy it, and maybe we saw some great results in our own population. Well, that's a big step, but it is a small step relative to all that needs to occur next. What needs to occur next is this now going to get deployed into a larger cohort? If so, we need to do another evaluation. have we thought through, and this is going to probably require maybe a multidisciplinary group to say, have we truly thought through whether or not there is bias that's been introduced? To your point about getting misleading results, a lot of it has to do with the fact that, we haven't thought through all the issues. And that's, when I think about like how this whole issue about bias was introduced and racial discrimination, it was purely because we hadn't envisioned that this would be used in this capacity. It would be used to determine access to, things such as, who gets a transplant, who doesn't get a transplant. Well, then we look at the results and we see, whoa, why is it that African Americans, who have a very high incidence of this, renal failure, are not getting the transplants, but they're being weeded out because of this. And then we go back and we realize, wait a minute, there's something wrong with our algorithm. So we need to be proactively thinking about all the implications that the AI can have, and then essentially make sure that we have addressed them. So this is going to be a big issue. It's not. This is what the reason is, because AI has been viewed as this is a technology that technologists develop, and then it gets deployed into the clinic. It is validated and it's deployed. We're now getting to the point where we need to start thinking about, okay, this is going to be an important part of how we deliver care. Care needs to be multidisciplinary. We need to think about all these different elements. Have we incorporated that? And so we're going to have to redesign around AI to make it as useful as possible. It's not just going to be an adjunct to what we currently do. It really has to be front and center with a whole bunch of folks working on it through different angles.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yep. Very good. Michael.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thanks. Yeah, it was great to hear your story and journey. One thing that kind of resonated with me is, we're in a similar position now as you may have been early, where we have this tool, this electronic record tool that we're developing as a small academic lab. And then, how do you decide when or whether to make that transition where you're trying to license a tool to like a bigger company, like with Cerner, for instance, acquiring your thing. So far, we've published everything. All of our code has been open source, in the interest of reproducibility and so forth. But of course, at the same time, we're again a small group and we don't have the resources to like get FDA approval, for instance. So I guess, how do you make that decision? Like when you go from being an academic focus group to trying to license something, or what options are there, I guess, for a group like that who's trying to get their tool used sort of in actual practice?
Is it being used outside of Mass General Brigham, or is it only used? So
we've had some collaborators who've used it in Korea, but this has all been retrospective so far. So it's using data that's already been collected. So the point of this trial was to do a prospective, like where we actually give this information to clinicians and affect their decisions as part of a clinical trial, but it's not being used as like a product anywhere. This is all research.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, I'll delve deeper into my experience, and then maybe this gives you some insights in terms of like how it ties into the business applications. Generally speaking, businesses don't, unless they know, they're very forward thinking, they're saying that this is a technology that we absolutely need to have, or these are the people that we need to have. They typically look based on financial performance and growth. And so the way that we grew our business was we started first with an idea. We built sort of like an opportunity. We actually started working with a small set of hospitals across the country, and we were able to prove and validate that this worked with these hospitals. And then these hospitals ended up, telling other hospitals, saying, hey, you need to take a look at this because we're all faced with the same problem. This can be really helpful. And they ended up becoming our evangelists. They were telling about, it saved us 95% of the time. It improved quality. Our docs love it. And now we had a successful go live. I mean, these are the things that every hospital was struggling with. And because we were starting to get, sort of this growing base of clients, and the fact that there was new regulation that was driving hard that everyone had to go live with EHRs, I think that's when Cerner said, wait a minute, there's something here that we can take full advantage of. And so they wanted to bring incorporated into their system. So I think there was a little bit of legwork that we had to do in terms of building and growing the business. It was a strange thing because I was seeing patients half the time, and then I was like doing a sales call with a hospital, trying to describe how this tool could help them save lives, but also could be used within their EHR. And so I feel like that was an important part. But part of the reason why we did it, there was also something for us apart from the business side. We knew that in order for this to actually be fully utilized, it had to be integrated into the clinical workflow, which was the EHR. And the only way, and everyone kept on saying, well, you just integrate it. Well, the EHRs were unwilling to integrate new sources unless it was something that there was an incentive for them. So for us, this was the only way for us to be able to get this to that next level of widespread adoption. So I would look at it from both perspectives. There's sort of a business perspective of, like when are you ready, to be able to kind of move on to that next stage. But there's also needs from a growth perspective. If you want to think about what is it that this company can do for you and your business to be able to help you successfully grow. And for us, it was the right time. It was the right opportunity. And I think ultimately had we not done it, we would never have been able to, I don't think you'd be seeing evidence-based order sets in the EHRs, or at least it may have been taking a lot longer for that to emerge. It really did require sort of the right time and the right opportunity for us to be able to do this.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks. All right, Ling Meng.
I actually just wanted to jump in quick, just before we go to the other question. Our breakout's set to end at 10:55, so just to keep that on your radars.
Okay, all right. So we're closing in on the last set of questions, maybe the last one here. Lingman, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you for your fantastic sharing. I learned a lot. And I'm just wondering, people always say that treat the patients, not the disease. So I'm just curious about the patient-centered care. So how can AI improve the patient-centered care? Can you have some examples for us?
Absolutely. So a large part of what patients struggle with is the fact that they don't have the right information at the right time. And when you think about what we do is we oftentimes put firewalls behind that. So there might be resources that they're eligible for. They may be eligible for a clinical trial. Well, if I'm a patient that's newly diagnosed with cancer and I'm trying to figure out which clinical trial to enroll in, how am I supposed to figure that out? Because the criteria are very complicated. I have no access to the criteria. So what we have found is that we can actually enable this to occur through AI and through interoperability. So I'll give you an example. We've been working on an AI clinical trials matching bot, which essentially pulls data, pulls the criteria from all the different registries that we have access to, and it has all the different codified elements. And in some cases, we can auto-populate it with information from the EHR. In other cases, we can ask very simple questions to the patient as a screening tool, and then as a means to go deeper. So they can just basically ask, we can ask a set of questions, complement it with the EHR data, and then it searches all the different data sets and says, hey, these are trials that potentially you may be eligible for. They could present that back to their doctor. And so now what you've done is you've empowered them with information that they could never have had before. And even the doctors may not have that information. A lot of times they only know about what's going on in their own their city, or maybe or in their hospital. But I think what we oftentimes realize is that this information gap is so vast that it's difficult for people to be able to do it in a timely manner. And next thing you know, you make a decision like, well, I'm just going to go with the traditional route. And then you're already down that path. And by then you're no longer eligible because of the timing issues or whatever. So I think that that's where we can really help. We can help improve care. We can empower patients with the right knowledge, and we can make care more streamlined. But that to me, that's a huge, huge, huge opportunity. All right. First of all, I want to say thank you. This has been a great conversation. I wasn't sure, kind of like whether or not the things that we would talk about would be of relevance, but it sounds like there was a lot of relevance to everyone. I'm, just to let you know, I'm on LinkedIn, David Rhew. I'm on Twitter, Rhew. You can follow me. I share a lot of what I talk about here through those public through those opportunities. If there's things that you'd like to reach out to me directly, you can also direct message me on those as well. Thank you all for your time. And with that said, I guess I'll pass it back to you, Catherine, for any final words in terms of what next steps are.
Sure. Thank you guys so much for a great session. Do encourage you guys to, swap contact info if that's something you're interested in, keeping in touch with each other. Otherwise, if you click the leave room button, it should take you back to the main session. You can stay in this room for another few minutes if you would like, but eventually Spark Street will push you back into that other room, so you can feel free to leave in your own time. But thank you again for such a great session, and thanks for joining us, David.
It's my pleasure. Thank you all. Good luck, and look forward to conversations in the future with you. Feel free to reach out to me through social media. Take care.